All right. Well, thank you for joining us, Kirsten.
Thanks for having me.
Very happy to be able to play $5 at the Door, the story of Crocs and Rolls. Definitely, doing a virtual festival is kind of different than in person, but we're glad we're able to, showcase films like yours. And yeah, thank you for joining us and doing a Q&A.
Oh, well, thanks so much for having me and having the movie play at your festival. Um, Really quick, I have such a connection to Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
Being from Thunder Bay, Ontario, which is just across
Sure.
the border, I was always forced to go on these hockey tournaments because my dad was a hockey coach and my brother played hockey.
Uh-huh.
And you'd end up in towns like in North Dakota, and you'd end up in those parking lots at rinks. But whenever we got to go to like Minnesota, it was like so great because it's like I saved up all my babysitting money, and I went to record stores and
Yeah.
went to clothing stores, and I just have such a fond memory of places like Duluth and Minneapolis,
Mm-hmm.
and getting to see like bands and music and bugging record store clerks at the Electric Fetus with
Yeah,
questions and
that's
dragging my
awesome.
poor mom downtown and help asking for money to buy like Butthole Surfers records and stuff. So I'm so thrilled to be a part of Sound and Scene this year for sure.
Awesome. Well, that's great. I'm glad you have a connection to our city and our state. It's nice when we can have films where people who are involved kind of, know the lay of the land a little bit, and it's not just strangers. So
Yeah,
that's
no,
cool.
it's great.
So first thing I wanted to bring up is there's a line early in the film where you talk about kind of growing up an outsider, and then you found this place and you felt like you finally like fit in, like you found a home in a sense. I think that's something a lot of us can relate to. I grew up going to a Catholic school, and I was the weird kid with the weird haircut who listened to weird music. And then when I started going to local shows, it was like, oh, these are my people. Um, how like finding that, and then going back to school where you maybe didn't feel as connected. Um, how was that, and like how important did that sort of shape who you became?
Oh yeah, it's funny like um the whole movie and the personal aspect of the story of my discovery of Crocs. Um Crocs meant everything to me at such a vulnerable sort of transformative time in my life. Because if you think about Thunder Bay and that it's an isolated city, kind of in the middle of like the forest, literally like in the middle of the boreal forest. Um, you know, in that pre-internet days where just finding content and information, what was coming down the highway into our town was just so critical and so important. And growing up as a really shy, nerdy kid, going to a Catholic school, not enjoying winter sports at all. Like I'm not a skier. I'm not like cold. It's not my thing. So not having a place where I felt like I fit in, and then having to go and kind of suffer those, as we all know, it's those long sufferable days of like high
Mhm.
school life where you don't think there's anybody out there in the world that's like you. And when I was dared by my friend to go to my very first show at Crocks and Rolls, and I showed up. And the reason why the film is called $5 at the Door is because I showed up spending all my money to get on the city bus. And when I showed up at the show, I didn't have enough for the cover, which was $5. And
Mhm.
Frank Lafredo, the owner of Crocs and Rolls, let me in for free that night. And just that like gesture of kindness in this really bizarre situation where I walked through those doors, it was like I don't know, it was like a world cracked open to a
Mhm.
whole different universe. And inside the band, the Dayglow Abortions were playing, which seems like,
It's an
which is
amazing first show.
yeah, and it was a Halloween show, and the singer, I think, had done some hallucinogens before he came in, and they had all made these. homemade costumes. So they were dressed as mummies, I believe, and they wrapped themselves in toilet paper. So it was such a, I had never experienced anything like that before. I had never heard music like that played live.
Mhm.
And when I looked around in the room in the club, um, there was kids that were like me. There was kids my age. There was older people who, the older kind of club crowd or whatever.
Mhm.
And you know, like I said, I was a Jerry Seinfeld looking kid. Like I was a real big nerd, and you would think I would be terrified by just the like, visually what was happening around me. And but I felt like in that moment that I could actually breathe. And the
Mhm.
cool thing about Crocs and Rolls, it was partially to see the bands come. Like you were seeing amazing bands that like there's no way. Like now look back at that time and place and I'm like, wow, I was so lucky to grow up there because I don't know anybody else who would have had the opportunity to see like SNFU, DOA, these incredible
Wow.
iconic bands play. And I would just show up and not know who was playing that night. And you'd walk in and you discover like, oh my God, okay, SNFU's playing tonight. This is insane.
Yeah.
But it was like finding your people, finding a place where you didn't have to change who you were. And the cool thing about Crocs that I've learned from just getting lots of people emailing me, messaging me after they watch it is that it really was like a no aggression zone. Like there
Mhm.
was never any fights. There was never any, people would get kicked out maybe if they drank too much, but there was no aggression between anybody there. And it was just, it felt like home,
Mhm.
and it felt like a really safe place because being a little different and looking a little different in like a small town at that time, it makes you vulnerable to things. I've had
Sure.
my fair share of, run-ins because somebody didn't like that I was wearing combat boots or whatever. But when you would go into Crocs, it was like a place where you could just be yourself and um, feel safe and taken care of. And it was like the whole community of music lovers there took care of each other. And when I got older and moved to a larger center, um, I just assumed that that's what all venues were like. And that wasn't the case.
Yeah.
And the cool thing about being from Thunder Bay is like nobody there really thinks they're cool. Like if you think you're like the hippest person at Crocs and Rolls, like they're gonna like tell you that you're like being an idiot or like get
Yeah.
lost or. So it was sort of like when I talk to people who grew up in places like Toronto or
Mhm.
Vancouver and they talk about Crocs and Rolls, that's the first thing they mention is like, yeah, like people left their cool at the door. Like if you walked in thinking you were like the bee's knees, you get told very quickly that you weren't as cool as you thought you were.
Yeah.
So it was interesting sort of going and living in bigger centers where the scenes were a little different than that. So I feel really lucky to have been able to have that experience growing up at that time in that place for sure.
Yeah. So kind of going off of that, as much as the movie is about this venue, um, very early on, like you can tell that it's very personal and it's also your story. Especially like with you going through the like mixtapes and listening to stuff that radio shows that you hadn't heard in forever.
Yeah.
Um, like I love that stuff. Was that always sort of the going to be a part of the movie, or did that just kind of like naturally, organically happen as you were filming?
Oh yeah, not at all. No, the reason why I made a career out of like music journalism and documentary film is because I do not like being the center of attention. I like my sweet spot is like asking the questions, not having any cameras on me, just kind of the background. That's my comfort zone. So when I first started the film project, it was going to be a very classic music documentary about a venue.
Mm-hmm.
And my story wasn't really going to factor in. And what ended up happening was when we were watching the footage that we shot. We had these really great interviews, and we were watching them, but it just seemed like something was missing out of like we were
Mhm.
piecing them together, and we made like I think 15 or 17 rough cuts of the film and
Wow.
trying to piece it together, and we were just sort of thinking like there has to be a reason like why this venue
Mhm.
was so special. And I was actually throughout the making of it, people kept like sort of pitching me the idea, like, "Oh, you really seem to like Crocs. Why don't you put your story in?" And I'd be like so resistant to it, like, "No way." And no, let's put the camera on somebody else. And
Yeah.
then when we interviewed the musician Bob Wiseman, um, he was one of the first people we interviewed in Toronto in 2017. He actually stopped the interview and and we put it in the film where he
Mhm.
says like you should put yourself in this movie, like why aren't you doing this? So very reluctantly I was slowly getting used to the idea, but it took the animation
Mhm.
to sort of um break the ice, I guess, if you will.
Yeah.
Like I really didn't want to be on camera, so the animators and my husband, who's actually the editor, were pretty sneaky. They took audio uh, excerpts from
Mhm.
an interview I did, and they pieced it together, and my husband snuck it to the animators, and he said, well, why don't you see what you can do with this and see if you could like create something. And that sequence of me, my story of going to Crocs and Rolls,
Yeah.
they had done a rough version of that just to show me what my story would look like if I put it into the movie. And then once I saw it, it was like something clicked where I almost became disassociated from my own personal story. So I started to think of my story in a very separate way. It almost became out of myself in a way. And I was able to then go on camera. And even my parents, like my dad, gave me all those old cassette tapes he found in the basement, and
Mhm.
just kind of going through those very naturally. um, I became slowly more comfortable. I'm not gonna lie though, it does sort of almost feel like somebody's reading your diary when people are watching the movie. But what has been so surprising to me is when I talk to people after they've watched it, or they reach out and send me an email or a message after they see it, um, they all talk about how universal my experience felt to them.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, and they can relate to the things that I'm saying. And in a way, like doing that made me realize, like, you know, I had made two previous documentaries before this where they were very traditional documentaries where,
Mhm.
you're almost like a fly on the wall. Um, but this was the first time I think where I really felt a connection to the people who were watching what I had made, and hearing their stories, and even people who weren't really into music. Like there's people that weren't really into live music, but they had a very similar experience, say going to an art house movie theater in their city,
Mhm.
or going to an art gallery kids program or a library program and learning that they like to write or do visual art. And it almost made it and it's weird because we're doing everything virtually now, but it
Mhm.
almost sort of mimicked that community that I had grown up in at Crocs. Like
Yeah.
you could see that those values and those things that are so important were very much alive, even in this sort of situation that we're in. And it brought everyone sort of connected. So that felt really good. But I'll tell you, like, seriously, like, it took a year and a half for people to like and like it would happen during interviews with people, like with Sookie and Lee in the movie,
Mhm.
with Bob Wiseman, Dave Badini, Dave Ulrich, like they were all saying like you should put yourself in the movie, and I'd be like, no, 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 we don't want to do that. And then yeah, it ended up being probably the most rewarding filmmaking experience I've had, but also personally to
Mhm.
just feel that connection to other people and not feel alone once again 30 years later.
Yeah.
You know, Crocs is helping me once again, you know, so it's been really good.
It's I'm glad that you mentioned the how people connect to it, because that was the second note that I made when I was watching it. I was just like, I know this place. I've never been to this place,
Yeah.
but I've been to this place. Like, I know, I get it. I get this movie. I know what
Yeah.
this is about. So yeah, it's, you know, it's like you said, it's something that I think a lot of us can relate to. And
Yeah, and it's cool too because like when you're a young person, you
mhm,
know, it's like I see it in my own kid. Like they just feel like I'm so alienated. I like nobody understands. And but those are really strong feelings. And the thing about like Crocs and places like Crocs and Rolls where you're young and you're experiencing these incredible you're experiencing art and music in with other people, and you're having that collective experience, and it's a human experience to be able to share that with one another. But
mhm,
it also kind of shapes who you're going to become. Like I say it in the film, like if I hadn't walked through those doors, and still to this day I don't know how I got the courage to do that. It just seems
mhm,
like so out of character. You know, to have walked through those doors, but it shaped every decision I ever made after that. And
yeah.
Frank Lafredo too, the owner, he was like, he, I always say like he sort of looks like Stanley Kubrick with the mullet and the big, you know, like he has that, you know, he's a pretty intimidating curmudgeon sort of guy. But for me, being able to see this adult, and at the time he was only 23, 24, like he looked like super old to me at the time. But you know, to see this person be an adult and be able to do what they wanted and be good and kind and give back to their community, it does shape you when you see that in action as a young person. And
Mhm,
I know from talking to other people at Crocs and Rolls who are part of that Crocs and Rolls family, it really did shape who they were too. I mean, there's Michel Dumont, the artist and activist in the film. He
mhm,
is very vocal about like how Crocs influenced him and how he wanted to be in the world. And certainly with me, I wouldn't have even thought that music journalism was a job, you know, if I hadn't sort of sort of engrossed myself in that counterculture. Like I just wouldn't have thought it was even possible for someone like me to write about something that they love. And to be able to see Frank and how he treated people too, it sort of shapes how you want to be in the world. And I was really, I guess I had forgotten about it for a while, like that do it yourself grassroots
mhm,
mentality that we all had, that philosophy. Like I guess I kind of I thought it had gone. But
yeah.
doing this film and, you know, like when I put out the call on social media that I was doing this movie, I was inundated by like an avalanche of people who were so willing to search their garages, their basements for ticket stubs and t-shirts and posters. And they would send me, like they would mail me photos. They would come to my PO box in the town where I live, and you know the post office would be like, "What are you doing? Like, do you have a mail order business? Like, why are these manila envelopes coming to you? What's happening?" And people were so generous with wanting to archive this story, and it made me remember that that philosophy that we all had back then, that do it yourself, help somebody out just because you want to and you want to like make the world a cooler place, like that
Mhm,
was very much still alive. And it was a reminder to me that you know, it was so important and valid then, but it was still happening now. And it's also been great to see like younger people who watch it. And my animators are very much younger than me, and I had to explain how I used to do posters, band posters back in the day, and
yeah.
they were just intrigued, like they didn't even understand. And they would say, wait a second, you would show up at the club and like you wouldn't You wouldn't know who is playing? Like, that's ridiculous. You didn't see a YouTube video or anything? And I'm like, no, I would just
There
show
was
up.
no YouTube.
Yeah, I know. Or like making the like they thought this was totally like they thought I was making this up, like going to like the library and
Mhm.
cutting out catalogs and making
Yep.
the cut and paste posters and then photocopying them. Like,
Yeah.
um,
I still do flyers that way. I don't know how Photoshop works. I still do them like that.
I love cut and paste. It's so like it's
Yeah.
immediate. It doesn't like there's no software I have to like
Yeah.
it and it was so great to know that like it was bringing the young people too. And what has been really cool for Frank is that young people in Thunder Bay that are going to shows, like we're talking like, you know, and all ages kids and like,
Mm.
you know, they're contacting him on Facebook and like, you know, telling him thank you so much. And he's just feeling like it, you know, that everything that he's worked towards and has made a difference. And that's been really satisfying to be able to do that for him because he's given so much to so many people.
That's awesome. So mentioning the animation, I wanted to ask where the idea for that style came from, because I think it's really interesting and adds to the movie. You know, it's not your typical, just like, you know, it looks like a cartoon,
Right.
like the sort of like cut and paste style. And I think is really awesome and really effective. How did
Oh,
that come about?
oh well, thanks so much. That's so great because that was it was so funny. Like I mentioned, the animators are quite a bit younger than me, like
Mhm.
quite a bit younger than me. And I had this idea because we had this great rheostatics story of when they're chasing down the train. So what happened is this band plays Thunder Bay. They want to get out of Thunder Bay. They borrow a truck and then they drive down the train tracks trying to catch the train before it leaves town. It's a very cinematic like story. But like, what do you do
Yeah.
when all this cool stuff happens prior to iPhones and nobody's taking video of it? So we needed a way to be able to show visually
Mhm.
these stories that people were telling where there wasn't any sort of evidence of it happening. So I had this idea. So I always wanted to do some sort of animation that was reminiscent of the cut and paste show posters that you would see all over town and
Mhm.
that are very familiar to me. But what ended up happening, because the animators are very young, when I was trying to explain what that was, and I needed to show like examples and pull like art for them and send it to them because they didn't really understand what I was talking about. Um, a really cool thing happened. So they took that general concept of the cut and paste poster and then they put their own spin on it. So when you talk about the aesthetic, it's so cool. And thank you so much for sharing that because it really was this hybrid of two generations kind of colliding together and collaborating together. So
Yeah.
and I think that it's better for it because the animation that I had in mind was very on the nose.
Mhm.
It was very like specific, but they put that sort of twist, and I just think it tells a richer story. And you know, working with them and going back and forth it was so exciting to see it all come together because they had taken this concept, sort of run it through their filter of their generation and came up with something totally new. And it was just like, yes, this is exactly, it wasn't what I thought I wanted, but I definitely want this now. And it was just a great thing to do, but it was so funny. Yeah, no, I had to get examples of like what
Mhm.
a cut. Yeah. And we would take the Sears catalog and we would cut it out and they'd be like, wow, that just seems like a lot of work. And I'm like, yeah, but
Yeah, but it was worth it. That was part of the charm of it. It was like making mixtapes instead of playlists. Like you had to sit there and like dedicate time to it.
oh, I
Yeah.
know. And you know, I always tell this story because like I have younger nieces and nephews and they're always like, so what was it like before the internet? And I'm like, well, you know what? You had to work it you had to work harder for stuff. And I always tell this one story, and I'll try to make it quick, but it's okay, so I'm watching Much Music, and there's a band on there, and the
Mhm.
drummer has a shirt, a Love and Rockets comic book shirt, and I become obsessed with this shirt. But I don't know how to get this shirt because there's no Amazon, there's no internet. I don't even know if it's the band or the comic book. I
Uh,
don't know. So I'm like, well, I'm gonna go to the local comic book store and I'm gonna ask the guy and describe the shirt. So I go, and the guy's surly because he's always surly, but I like describe the shirt. And he's like, oh, okay, you want this. And he pulls out the comic book. So I buy the comic book, go back home. I look in the first page to get the address of the publisher, and I call the number, and I get the secretary or the front desk person, and I go, hi, I really want to buy a shirt. And she's like, okay, well, can you describe the shirt? So I spent 20 minutes describing the shirt, and then she's like, oh, I think I know the one you want. Okay, and what size? And then how are you going to pay for this? So my dad is at the kitchen sink in his underwear after his shift at
uh-huh.
the railway, and I'm like, dad, can I borrow your card, your credit card? He's like, yeah, sure. And I asked the lady on the phone, like, oh, do you want to verify this? And she's like, oh, sure. Like, just trying to get me off the phone. And my dad's like, she can use my credit card, it's fine. And I gave her the number. And like, honestly, like 6 weeks later, miraculously, the shirt shows up. You know what I mean? But I loved that shirt and I wore it till it fell off. And honestly, like nothing I've ever bought on Amazon Prime will ever come close
Mhm.
to like, it was like hard won. And like when you mentioned like mixtapes, it's like we had our one friend who had the job at McDonald's who would go buy all the imports. And then she
Mhm.
would come and make tapes for all of us and spend like weekends. And
Yeah.
but it had like value, and I would never throw away those cassettes, just even if they don't play, because it's
Mhm.
like an archive, it's an artifact of my youth. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, I don't even know how I did road trips and like survived with a map. Like I've become so used to my phone and
Mhm.
access, but like yeah, I mean you did it back then. But yeah, pre-internet, it's a whole other concept.
Yeah. So I'm gonna wrap it up here pretty quick, but I
Yeah,
did want to at least ask, in the in today's world with the pandemic and live music not really being a thing, and Crocs is really a throwback to that pre sort of corporate owned music venue thing, which is kind of disappearing a lot these days. Is Frank still doing shows? Is he uh, still out there doing
yeah.
it?
Oh no, he's not going anywhere. And like honestly, like his daughter Jessie says it in the film.
Yeah.
He's not gonna stop. Like
And I love that it's become like a family thing with her
no, I know, and
helping
it's
out.
like
And
she's like Mrs. Frank, you know what I mean? Like
yeah,
it's just like they're like a great little team, the two of them.
yeah.
But it is true, like he's not going to stop. Like right now in Canada, like just because of our government restrictions, like
Mm.
nobody's really doing live music venues inside
It's
a
the same
building.
thing here. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're all sort of like it's been put on pause, and it's been sort of sad too, like of hearing like of iconic Canadian venues like shutting down for good. So it's a little
Yeah.
scary. But Frank, I was just talking to him last week, and he's already like booking shows for 2021, and
Mm.
like he's already sort of thinking about what's next. And I think it does sort of go back to that punk rock sort of do it yourself, like um, mentality. Like he's just going to keep going, and the hard work and these stumbling blocks, they're not really stopping him from doing what he loves to do. I mean, his whole story was, when him and his brother had bought the building. It was an Italian
Mhm.
restaurant, and that's what it was going to be. And Frank had always wanted to move to bigger centers or go to like London or New York and run with that crowd, and he never could, right?
Mhm.
So he turned his like family business into all ages punk rock, bar, because he wanted to see these bands play. So nothing was going to stop him from being able to see bands, not just like SNFU, DOA, Canadian acts, but he would bring in like Robin Hitchcock would like
Mhm.
play, and he's still doing it. Like he still brings in these acts. Like he brought in like Future Islands like last year, and he brought in Beach House when I was still living in Thunder Bay, and I was like,
Uh-huh.
Frank, like, and he's such a champion for independent music. Like that is never going to stop. So whether he's like promoting music in his own club, or he's doing promotion across Northern Ontario and booking bands across Northern Ontario, he's still going to keep going because it's what he loves and it's his passion. But like, okay, one more story real quick. I know you got to
Yeah.
go, but okay.
No, for sure.
So when I was moving back to Thunder Bay, my husband got a film teaching job in Thunder Bay. So we had to move back from Calgary, which is where we had been living for 15 years.
Mhm.
So we're driving into town, and at this point, I just assumed Crocks had been closed for like 25 years. I didn't even know he was reinventing himself and the name and the bar. So we're driving into town, and I see this billboard for Crocks 2.0. And I was like, what is this? What is happening? And on the billboard, he had like who was playing, and it was like Elliot Brood, some other Canadian independent artists, some local bands, and then at the bottom it was like, and members of the Wu-Tang Clan. And I made my husband stop the car. We had just driven from Winnipeg to Thunder Bay. And I said, you got to stop the car. I got to get out. I got to look at this. What is happening? And it was so, I don't know. It was like all was okay with the world. Like Frank was still doing what Frank always
Mhm.
does, He was still bringing in amazing international artists that, why are they playing in Thunder Bay?
Why not?
Why not? And he was still promoting Canadian independent acts, which has always been a passion for him.
Mhm.
And that's Frank in a nutshell. Like he's not going to stop. And it's reassuring to me with everything going on that that's still going to be there in some capacity. And yeah, he's going to make Thunder Bay better for it too, you know. So
Yeah.
yeah, no, it's been great. But yeah, I mean, I have musician friends who are like, well, I guess I'm gonna need play on the computer now. And like
Yeah.
we're gonna
Do what we're doing,
yeah,
basically. Yeah.
and I think too, like after like it's important to know like this is gonna end at some point. Like it's gonna
Mhm.
be over, and it's not going to be a new normal, but it's going to be something totally new.
Yeah.
And I always have faith in creative people, creative problem solvers, artists, because like they're going to find a way to to bring their art and their creativity to people. And I, yeah, it's just important to know like this will be over, and we're going to come out on the other side, and there's going to be people like Sound and Scene and Frank and artists who are just going to keep going, and who knows, they'll use these tools to make even something cooler. Who knows what's happening? But I'm excited for it, and it's something to actually like look forward to. But
Yeah.
I'm hoping Frank brings back Future Islands because I really want to go see them. And I'm like, it's like a 16-hour drive from like where I live now, but I will do that drive if that happens again.
Yeah.
And yeah, no, like I was there and I'm like, Frank, how are you bringing in Beach House? Like what, like, why are they coming here? Like, yeah, it was just bizarre, but awesome, bizarre, but
Yeah.
he's great.
Awesome. Well, thank you for talking to us and letting us play your film. And hopefully, hope all the best for it. And
Yeah,
yeah. Um,
it's been really great. And in a way, I think too, like the pandemic has not, I wouldn't say helped the movie, because it's been a really up and down. But what I have been loving is that people have been able to connect to me and talk directly to me,
yeah.
and just like the messages and the emails I've been getting from people have been like really special and important, and they've helped me, and it just helps me feel more connected. So, this isn't like the ideal for anybody, but it's been a really great experience to be able to connect one-on-one with people, and that's been really an important thing right now, I think, for everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, well, thank you so
Well,
much for playing my movie. It's
yeah,
awesome.
glad we could. Thank you.
Yeah, and good luck with the festival, and I hope lots of success, and the lineup's crazy.
So,
And Pump Up the Volume.
yeah.
Oh, it's like my favorite movie, and it was my first
Yeah.
date movie, and I'm like so seriously, the dad picked us up in his like station wagon, and we went, and yeah, it's my first date movie. So when I saw that you guys were doing the panel, I'm like, oh, well,
Uh-huh.
this is just full circle for me. And I don't know, I'm not like a real spiritual person, but I'm just gonna say Pump
Yeah.
Up Volume. Yeah, that was it for me. But
Awesome.
congratulations on everything you're doing.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, well, take
Yeah.
care.
All right. You too.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.